Hello, thanks for staying with us. Now, when President Barack Obama took office in January 2009, he vowed to get U.S. ties with the Muslim world on a fresh footing after the Bush administration. What sort of measures has the Obama administration taken so far?
I think this is, I'm glad you asked this question because I think some people, that's widely misunderstood. What he was speaking about was connecting and engaging our peoples. I can speak most about what we're doing here in Malaysia. And I know this is a country where obviously we have a focus on this whole region and particularly in Malaysia, but we're doing quite a lot. One is, for example, President Obama spoke in Cairo about science and technology. Well, when Secretary Clinton was here, she signed a science and technology agreement. You know, that agreement had been kicking around between our governments since 1994. But with that emphasis, both our governments said, you know, we're going to do this, and we're going to start to create greater collaboration among research scientists. President Obama named a science envoys for various parts of the world. The woman he's named for Malaysia and this region is named Dr. Caldwell. She was the former director of our National Science Foundation, eminent scholar, published many books, research, articles, and she's going to come here in the first half of next year, and we're going to really try to build that conversation. So that's just one aspect. Education and exchange is another. Prime Minister Najib spoke eloquently and movingly to President Obama about let's try to get something going on English language education in ASEAN and Malaysia in particular. Secretary Clinton was quite taken with that, and we're following up on that very concretely. We're going to have new programs to expand Americans teaching English in Malaysia. I think there's been a response in terms of the number of people interested in going to the United States. Our visa applicants are up 20% this year over last year. We have more students than we've had in a very long time. 6,000 Malaysians are studying in the United States right now. So I think sometimes people look and say, well, you know, have we solved Middle East peace? I think what President Obama was speaking about, and we'll no doubt talk about Middle East peace, but what he was speaking about is how do we increase the mutual understanding and the engagement between our peoples? And I think a lot is going on. I could speak, you know, about entrepreneurship areas, connections that were being made in a lot of different areas. So I'm very enthusiastic about what's being done here in Malaysia, and it's being replicated throughout the Muslim world, as you put it.
Okay, so speaking about Middle East peace, the U.S. government on December 7th decided to abandon its efforts to basically revive direct peace negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians, which is a matter of great concern in the Muslim world, especially, and one of the countries that are very, very concerned about the situation in Gaza is Malaysia. So it's now, I understand that the U.S. government is now going to refer to shuttle diplomacy. Could you tell me what shuttle diplomacy really means?
Happy to. I've done some of it myself, but can I back up a little bit and talk for a couple? I'm always a little uncomfortable with terms like the Muslim world and the West. I'll speak from our side. I mean, to me, the United States is the East, at least from here. We're a Pacific country. I mean, we're engaged from the Pacific side. And so to sort of lump the West or the Muslim world together, I think is not necessarily helpful to the conversation. Our President Obama is our first sort of Pacific president. He was born in Hawaii, spent some of his years in Indonesia, and I think has a great interest in this part of the world, and he had great exposure through his family and his upbringing to the Muslim world, as you put it. So I put that as a backdrop to the way we look at issues like the Middle East. These are very difficult negotiations. President Obama and Secretary Clinton and many others have, and our former Senate Majority Leader, George Mitchell, directly, heavily engaged, you know, negotiations that have gone on for hours and hours. Shuttle diplomacy is a term in diplomacy when, you know, when it's considered more effective than trying to bring the two parties together, to have a third party speak to one and then go speak to the other and back and forth. Those are tactical issues.
Mm-hmm.
The commitment is there to see if we can create a negotiated two-state solution that provides security and prosperity for both the Palestinians and Israel. I think Malaysia has a contribution to make here, and I think it's a contribution not just to Gaza, which is one part of Palestine, but to the West Bank and to the government of President Abbas. And I think it would be very helpful for to be involved not just at the civil society level, but at the governmental level. We need everyone involved to support this process.
Okay. So the problem is with the direct peace negotiations being abandoned, some pro-Palestinian activists and supporters, of course, say that, well, it's proof that the U.S. will always side with Israel. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, I know that's strongly felt here, and I understand that. I've heard this myself. I can only say that there is a very, you may follow, but there's a very vibrant debate in the United States about the tactics and maybe the sort of operational goals of negotiation. So it's not as if, there's, back in the United States, people are just saying, okay, what does Israel want? Here's what we're going to do. There's a debate that you can read about in the newspapers with some very prominent Jewish American commentators coming up with all sorts of different ideas and viewpoints. So I think anyone who has that point of view ought to look closely at that kind of discussion that's going on. But this is a negotiation. Both parties have to agree, and we have to work on that. One of the things I'm very encouraged about that Secretary Clinton spoke to is the development over the last year in the governing structures in the Palestinian, from the Palestinian Authority. The World Bank did a very interesting report where they evaluated great progress in governing institutions, which is encouraging because it prepares Palestine for statehood, a statehood that can be secure for Israel and other countries, and also bring prosperity to its people. So I think some important progress is being made. Negotiations are tough. It's hard to predict on what timeline they're going to go ahead.
Let's talk about the United States. How would you describe the relationship between the government and the non-Muslim communities and the Muslim communities? How's your relationship there?
Well, let me begin with an anecdote. My father-in-law, my wife's father, lives in Washington, D.C. on Massachusetts Avenue, right near where there are a number of embassies. And one of the reasons he chose the apartment he lives in is because it's across the street from the beautiful mosque in Washington, D.C. And whenever I have dinner there, we hear the call to prayer. It's always overflowing. So when I hear people sort of say, well, to be Muslim in America is a scary thing, or there's Islamophobia, there's everything in all countries. There are people who maybe who have narrow-mindedness in all of our countries, but there at that mosque, the only thing you worry about is whether you can get a parking place at prayer time, because no one gives it a second thought that the Muslims in Washington, D.C., of which there are many, and in many parts of the United States are going to the mosque for prayer. Of course they are.
All right. So now we'll take a short break. When we come back, we'll be talking about WikiLeaks and the repercussions on U.S. world ties.